Welcome to Segmented Turning. This is part number 6 in our series. We have a lot of different things to bring up to your attention. But first I want to complete something and then show you some new techniques. So remember last segment we made this ring, we sliced it in half, took it off, I glued it onto here, and then I cored out the center. Well, here's what it looks like once I've all put it together. Here's the vessel with the ring. And this is the core, which I've added to the other end of it. So I thought I'd just finish this off real quick before we go on. By the way, when I was building this vessel, I thought the bottom was much too long. So I cut it off, shortened the bottom, and glued it back on again. This is segmented turning. You can do that a lot. So this is shorter than what you saw in the last video segment, simply because I could do that. So I got walnut, a veneer, redwood burl, veneer, segmented ring, veneer, redwood burl, veneer, segmented ring. Had to stop and remember. They're all there. So I want to just finish this piece and reduce the base. I'm not going to part it off. I never do. I always leave it on the faceplate until I've got all the finishing coats completed and I'm totally happy. And then I part it off. So I'll put one coat of finish on, but I won't complete it today. So I'm going to take it home just this way. So let's lace at 0. Yeah, it's running a little not true on this lathe. Just test that again. Well, we have a little bounce because something has moved since we worked on this last. So I'm going to cut up here pretty carefully. But I need to take this ring down using a shallow bladed gouge. Cutting on the edge of one of these segmented rings, I always take very light cuts until I know everything is running absolutely perfectly. Now you can see the veneer ring below. Because everything's moved a little bit, I'm just retruing the outside before I do a little bit of sanding and then a little bit of finishing. Little parting cut at the bottom, which I always do. Not attempting to part it off, I just simply want to see where the base ends. And I can see a little bit of flare down here that I did not want. So I'll pull the base in a little bit more. Just at the bottom. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Just a quick sand. That was just a little 180, and that's sufficient for me to get this in shape, pulled back in. Everything looks pretty good. Always love to do this, put just a little bit of finish on it because it makes things look so much different so fast. Again, my favorite. Most finishes work, it just happens to be the one I like, I use a lot. Turn my speed way down. I use a little makeup sponge to apply finish. And the first coat is going to soak in like a sponge. And it'll take 7 or 8 coats for me to get, to get this to a look I would like to have. But the first one gives us the right color. And when I get home with this piece, I will pour a little bit inside and slush it around and then dump it out and take a paper towel and try to wipe up as much of the excess as I can. The idea is simply to seal both sides of the vessel. And I can keep going on here for a while. The walnut and the redwood burl both are absorbing a huge amount of finish. And as I put a coat on, I can literally see it gets sucked in. So that's the conclusion of the project we started on last week. More work to go, but it's a good start. That's one thing. Next thing is some new techniques. Set this away. And I'm going to show you a piece that I prepared for this week's demonstration. And this is a segmented vessel in which I have gone from the dark wood of bloodwood to the lighter wood of yellowheart. And this translation from one color to another is called ombre. And if you are into hairstyling and painting and other forms of art, you'll recognize that the transition of one color into another is a technique that's known in many disciplines. Well, this was easy, but this was also very hard. It's hard for several reasons. Number one, as you can see right here at the top, the spacers are extremely small, about 50 thousandths of an inch. And if this is the segment and this is the spacer, as it is, that works fine until I get down to someplace about the middle where the segment and the spacer are almost identical. And as I go further down, it's easier to cut the segment on the darker wood now and to make the spacer the lighter wood. In other words, about here, I changed from cutting segments here to cutting segments on the dark wood. So I had to transition from one to the other. The segment width stays the same, but remember, as we talked in the last video, that spacers simply take a certain width away from the individual segment. Well, in order to not get too confused, because I had a lot to do, I made myself up a spreadsheet. And on this spreadsheet, I show the walnut. Well, I used walnut and maple here, but I really used yellowheart bloodwood. So as I go down here, I'm saying, here's what's happening to the bloodwood, 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 and in a different column, I'm showing what's happening to the yellowheart. So I'm changing from one to the other, but I have it all laid out so I can go down here and check off what happens at each layer. So I had to cut some very, very fine spacers here and down at the bottom when it's yellow, but in both cases they're very, very small. And the spacers get larger as they approach the center from either direction. The problem with cutting very small pieces on a table saw is the fact that the blade itself will create enough draft that it actually can take and throw that piece away and destroy it. So you have a high loss rate and fairly irregular cuts if you do not have a special way of doing that. And so I've made a sled, which I've used for many years, for just cutting spacers. Let me show you that. Here it is in live time. I can't use it on the table saw because my saw is different than the one we have here at the studio. But this is made out of acrylic material. It runs in both miter slots on the table saw and spans across the blade. And I have a fence that goes all the way across the blade. So let me show you in a little video segment how I set that up on my table saw at home. You'll take a quick look at this. So now you see how I actually set up the tray for cutting the spacers. Now let me show you how I actually cut those spacers. And you're going to see me using a stick sort of like this. All this is a piece that I hold the block of wood down on both sides. One side is the feed wood and the other side will be the spacer. So cutting these things is really very simple, and it's very safe because my fingers are never near the saw blade. Let me show you cutting a few of these spacers. Okay, so now you've seen how I've done that. That technique allowed me to cut these very narrow bloodwood pieces and these very narrow yellow heart pieces. This piece down here is about 50 thousandths of an inch thick. In other words, less than a 16th. And you can do that if you have a sled that's appropriate for it. And this is one way I've chosen to do that. Well, the other thing I've done on this vessel, two other things that you can't actually see. One is, because the vessels are getting taller and I'm going to turn it on two different face plates, I decided to create more mass near the two face plates for the purposes of having stability while I'm doing the turning and hollowing. So I increased the segment widths here and down here. And at the same time, I've done something you cannot see until I part it off, but I've created a floating foot in this vessel also. The bottom here is a segmented ring. Inside of this is a floating foot. So let me show you the steps I went through in terms of thinking about how to lay this vessel out. I have a drawing and a few comments about it to show you what I mean by increasing these thicknesses and planning for the segmented foot. This is the drawing of the vessel we just turned. I'm not considering the segments and the spacers, but only the shape in the drawing. So first thing I want to do is to talk about mechanical support. So when I'm turning a vessel like this, there's many times that I'm going to want to be sure that I have more mass at different locations. For instance, up here in the top lever, I'm going to want to add more mechanical support to the inside. That just allows me, when this is being turned in two parts, to be able to have a stable, non-vibrating piece on the lathe. If you're concerned about alignment, it's easy enough to add additional mass to the inside of all layers, just like this. So at the bottom, I also need the same thing, more mechanical support, so that when I'm turning this and splitting that out of someplace like here, I have plenty of support both ways. Mass on the inside does not affect the shape of the drawing. Well, let's consider one other thing I want to do. I do not want to have a disc bottom, but I want to have a floating foot. So what I'm going to do is replace this with a flat, in other words, another ring, which is going to look sort of like this. It's going to have a hole in it. At this point right here, I'm going to cut a corner out and drop my disc in, which represents the visible foot from the outside. And then I need to cover that. So on the next level, I'm going to increase the diameter so that this floating disc that's been inserted here can be hidden. I'll show you a note right up here at the top that there's a little extra thickness. That part can easily be turned away at the very end until I get it down to where I need it to be. So consider modifying your drawings, both at the top and at the bottom, to give you additional mechanical support during the time that you're doing the turning, knowing in both cases that the additional mass in here can be removed during the turning process. I hope that helped clear it up a little bit about how I planned this out. Floating foot is a three-part operation. I put the ring on, I create a disc, I insert the disc, and I put the next ring over to capture it. And I'll show you the videos of those in a few minutes, but I want to part it off first and let you see what the finished product actually will look like. Let's set this out of the way. Create a little working room here. So the bottom of this foot on this vessel is already finished. It's already done. It's actually decorated. All I'm doing now is parting it off so that you can have a chance to see that. Well, I'm going to use a thin parting tool. I know in this ring here that I've cut a recess about halfway down this and inserted the disc. And so that leaves me approximately 1/4 of an inch of foot. So if I cut in at a very severe angle, I may end up cut too far. So I know that I only have a 1/4 inch from the bottom to where I want to complete this parting cut. So I'm going to be very cautious about doing that and not cut too deep. Let's zero it out again and start over, see how this one's running. Now this one's running pretty good. Now, I don't want this thing captured between centers and have it go flying off. So I'm going to be prepared to grab it. And I'm going to run the parting tool with my left hand. I'm going to support it along the forearm to give it some more stiffness. That's why I want to hold it. So, there's the bottom. A little cleanup to do where the parting tool didn't take it all the way. But that foot is in there and already completed. I have a little sanding to do, a little cleanup on the edge, but that's all manual work. I could put this on a vacuum chuck or jam chuck and do it. I probably will do this just by hand at home. But that's what that floating foot looks like on the inside. Now, how did I get there? Well, as I told you, it's a multi-stepped process. And so I want to show you the 4 components of making that, which I have recorded ahead of time. Let's put those in and have you see how I built this. Okay, so you saw me put this ring on, dig a recess into it, make a plug, which is this decorated component, and I put the decoration downward into this so it will be visible from the bottom. And then I captured it with the next ring up and just hid the edge. One thing you need to know is when I put that plug in, if it's a solid disc of wood, and the wood has grain that's going this direction, I don't want to glue this all the way around. I want to allow this to float, which means I'm putting a drop of glue here and here, just on the end grain, to allow this wood to be able to move as temperature and humidity and atmospheric conditions vary. This prevents any possibility of having a foot crack or break. How big of a wooden disc could I have used in here? There's no real rule. How much change in atmospheric conditions will affect how much it will move. If you make it in a dry part of the country and ship it to a more moist part of the country, that will affect it. Size of the disc will affect it. I choose to stay under about 2 inches. If my disc in the bottom is more than about 2 inches, I will almost always use a floating foot. A lot of different things in this particular segment. Sometimes when we put these together, we put veneers in between layers, you may have a problem. It may crack, or you may break it. Well, let me set up next to show you that veneers can be glued and clamped, so repairs can be done. I'll be back in a second after I've cleaned up a little bit and set up to show you that step. Cleaned up a lot, and I want to show you something about veneers. It's wood. We talked about what it can and cannot do. But one of the problems with veneers, sometimes they're flexible, like that. That's great. Oh my gosh. Well, sometimes that happens, and we break this, and I really don't want to throw this piece away. Well, I can glue this back together again. Let's take this piece right here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to overlap these two pieces, and I'm going to cut a clean edge to glue back together. So I've overlapped the two pieces, straight edge, sharpened box cutter, and my job is simply to cut through both pieces so I have a nice clean overlap. And I kept cutting until I could hear the fibers had finally cut. Let's get rid of the trash. And I'm going to glue these two pieces together. This is end grain. I can do that. I can glue it together side grain, much easier. But let me show you how I do that. First, I'm going to put glue on it. Not very much, so I've got a little bit of glue on my finger. I'm going to put it right on this edge. Way too much glue. Now I need to clamp it. Let's put those two pieces together. Now I'm going to put a clamp on it. Blue painter's tape? Yes. But if I stick it to this side and pull, it stretches a little bit. So when I let go of it, it's going to pull that joint tight. But if I leave it just like this, I need to clamp both sides. I don't want it to twist, so I'm going to clamp the other side. Stretch. That is going to be a tighter joint than the fibers of the wood were before. Can I glue it side grain? Well, if they're not square, I can't. But if the two edges are perfectly square, I can. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create two square edges. Straight edge, along the fibers. There's a clean edge. The other piece, along the fibers. There's a clean edge. So So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two edges and glue them together. Again, a little bit of glue. You saw how I put that on? Oh, that's way too much. Get rid of some of it. I'm going to just run it right along this edge. Put the pieces together. Now, this is a long piece. I don't want to put a long piece on, but I'm going to put 2 or 3 little butterflies across it. One here. Pulling these pieces together. Another little piece down here. Pulling them together. Flip it over. Clean up the excess glue. Because painter's tape stretches a little bit, it's a perfect clamp. Doesn't take much. Stretch it, stick it. Now, I guarantee you, when this glue dries, if I try to break this, I guarantee it's going to break someplace other than at that glue joint. That glue joint is going to be stronger than the fibers of the wood were before. Well, we covered a lot of different material, mostly about veneers and about spacers and about planning your segmented vessel so that you can have the easiest piece to turn. In our next video, I'm going to start talking about what we call feature rings and some of the concepts and some of the simple ones we can do that could enhance a turning. We'll see you in the next video. Keep those comments coming. We appreciate them. Click on the subscribe button. Join us. And if you click on the bell, you'll get a notification when the next video gets posted. We'll see you later.